Carlo Pedersoli broke the 1-minute barrier in swimming, earned an Olympic berth twice, built highways through Venezuelan jungle, wrote songs that made it onto national radio, founded an airline that delivers mail across Italy to this day, held patents for battery-powered vehicles decades before Tesla, logged thousands of hours as a commercial pilot, and then at age 38 stumbled into acting because another man fractured his ankle the night before cameras rolled. The stage name came from his favorite American beer and the actor whose films he'd watched obsessively. Budweiser and Spencer Tracy merged into Bud Spencer, and what followed was a career that made him more recognizable in Germany than most German actors while remaining virtually invisible in the United States. When death came in Rome on June 27, 2016, his final spoken word was "Grazie," and if you grew up anywhere between Lisbon and Budapest or anywhere in South America during the 70s and 80s, hearing that name probably brings an immediate smile because Carlo Pedersoli became Bud Spencer, and Bud Spencer became everyone's favorite giant who solved problems with open palm slaps and ate beans by the plateful while never actually hurting anyone. The family lost everything when bombs flattened Naples. Born October 31, 1929 in the Santa Lucia neighborhood, young Carlo came from money through his parents, Alejandro and Rosa, who'd owned a factory in Lombardy that their ancestors had established a century prior. Vera, his younger sister, arrived in 1934, and then the Second World War landed directly on top of them. Naples took some of the heaviest bombing runs in Italy, and one direct hit erased the Pedersoli factory completely, wiping out the family's financial security overnight. The Pedersolis relocated to Rome under the reasoning that the Vatican's presence might offer protection, and to survive those war years, they sold off the family linens piece by piece from the trousseau. Carlo turned 10 when the fighting started and 15 when it ended, but even amid deprivation, his physical gifts couldn't be hidden. Swimming club membership came at age 7. And by 15 he was defeating adult competitors in races. His rugby team won a national championship. Amateur boxing never produced a single loss according to his own accounting, and the war that stripped everything from his family also forged a physical specimen who would grow to nearly 2 meters tall with coordination to dominate virtually any athletic pursuit he attempted. September 19, 1950, at a pool in Salsomaggiore, the 20-year-old Pedersoli touched the wall at 59.5 seconds in the 100-meter freestyle, making him the first Italian in history to break 1 minute in that event. The Italian Swimming Federation confirmed this record, as did the International Olympic Committee's documentation. Helsinki, 1952, saw him reach the semi-finals in the 100-meter freestyle, and 4 years later in Melbourne, he reached the semi-finals again. Between those Olympic Games, he collected 14 national titles across 7 individual championships, 3 junior victories, and 4 relay wins. Water polo became his next target, and with SS Lazio, he won the 1954 Italian Championship before taking gold with the national team at the 1955 Mediterranean Games in Barcelona. The Italian Swimming Federation honored him decades later with the Caimano d'Oro in 2005, and his son Giuseppe would reveal years afterward that his father treasured those sporting achievements far more than any film role, calling the Olympic period perhaps the happiest stretch of his entire life. At 17, Carlo enrolled at Sapienza University of Rome to study chemistry, making him one of Italy's youngest university students at that time. When his family immigrated to Brazil in 1947, searching for a fresh start, he went along and worked at the Italian consulate in Recife, where he fell deeply in love with Brazilian music and carried that passion the rest of his life. Returning to Italy around 1948, he switched from chemistry to law with entirely practical reasoning. Legal studies left more time for swimming training. Sapienza eventually granted him his law degree, a detail confirmed across multiple biographical accounts, and along the way he became fluent in at least 6 languages, including Italian with its strong Neapolitan dialect, Portuguese from Brazil, Spanish from later South American work, German from formal study, plus English and French. After competitive swimming ended in 1957, Pedersoli made a decision that baffled everyone who knew him and moved to Venezuela for 3 years to work as a foreman on Pan American Highway construction and later for Alfa Romeo in Caracas. A 2-time Olympian, national hero, and law graduate was voluntarily building roads in South American heat, and when asked why his answer was disarmingly simple, he wanted to find out whether he was a brave man or a coward. Marriage to Maria Amato came in 1960, and her father Giuseppe Amato was one of Italy's most influential film producers with credits including Fellini's La Dolce Vita. Through that connection, Pedersoli entered the music business and signed with RCA Records to compose and produce Neapolitan folk and pop songs between 1960 and 64, writing lyrics for established Italian singers, including Ornella Vanoni and Nico Fidenco. He formed a band called Gli Acetanati del Ritmo that played nightclubs along Rome's glamorous Via Veneto. And one day, a young man from the small town of Polignano a Mare auditioned with songs that Pedersoli considered terrible and was turned away. That young man was Domenico Modugno, who would win the Sanremo Music Festival and achieve worldwide fame with Volare, one of the most recognizable Italian songs ever recorded, and Carlo Pedersoli had rejected him. After his father-in-law died in 1964, Pedersoli shifted to producing documentaries for RAI, Italy's national television network, and at 35 years old, he had been an Olympic swimmer, law graduate, construction foreman in Venezuela, songwriter for RCA, and television producer with acting still nowhere on his radar. Giuseppe Colizzi was casting a spaghetti western in 1967 and needed someone physically imposing, so someone pointed him toward the enormous swimmer and songwriter Carlo Pedersoli. Age 38 with zero interest in an acting career, Pedersoli agreed essentially as a lark, but the production required an English-friendly stage name since Italian names were considered unmarketable for international westerns. The entire spaghetti western industry ran on Americanized pseudonyms, and Pedersoli needed something that sounded rugged and Anglo-Saxon, so he chose his favorite American beer and his favorite American actor, Bud from Budweiser, and Spencer from Spencer Tracy. The film was God Forgives I Don't, released in 1967, and Spencer expected it to be a one-time payday with no training, no ambitions, and no illusions about his talent. Something about the camera liked him, though. The enormous frame, the grumpy face, the natural comic timing that came from being completely relaxed because he genuinely didn't care whether it worked or not. The day before shooting began on God Forgives I Don't. The actor cast opposite Spencer named Peter Martell broke his foot, and a last-minute replacement had to be found. Someone suggested a young actor who had recently adopted his own English-sounding stage name, Mario Girotti, now calling himself Terence Hill, and both Spencer and Hill had actually appeared as uncredited extras in the 1959 sword and sandal film Hannibal without ever meeting. Thrown together by a broken bone and a tight schedule, they discovered something that neither could explain and neither could replicate with anyone else: instant, effortless chemistry. Hill was nimble, quick, blue-eyed, and boyish, while Spencer was enormous, slow, grumpy, and bear-like, and together they formed a visual contrast so perfect it barely needed dialogue. Enzo Barboni cast Spencer and Hill in a low-budget comedy western called They Call Me Trinity in 1970, with Spencer playing Bambino, a hulking, perpetually annoyed horse thief who communicates primarily through grunts, slaps, and enormous plates of beans, while Hill played Trinity, his lazy, wisecracking younger brother who happens to be the fastest gun in the West. The film became the highest-grossing Italian film of its era, surpassing Fellini's La Dolce Vita at the Italian box office, and nobody saw it coming. The sequel, Trinity Is Still My Name, released in 1971, sold approximately 14.5 million tickets in Italy alone and over 12 million in Germany, making it the 7th most successful film in German box office history at that time, and worldwide it earned over $30 million. After filming All the Way Boys in 1972, a comedy where he and Hill played bush pilots in Colombia, Spencer was so taken with aviation that he earned his commercial airline pilot's license and helicopter license, logging over 2,000 hours in fixed-wing aircraft and 500 in helicopters, and calling flying the biggest passion of his life for over 35 years. October 29, 1981 saw him found Mistral Air, an actual airline that began operations in 1984 as an airmail service and expanded into passenger flights with contracts to fly Catholic pilgrims to Lourdes, Fatima, Santiago de Compostela, Israel, Poland, and Mexico. Spencer eventually sold the company through acquisitions. It was absorbed by Poste Italiane and rebranded as Mistral Air Cargo in 2019, and the airline Bud Spencer founded now delivers Italy's mail and is still operating today. He also held 12 patents, including a walking stick with built-in folding table and chair, an electric toy mouse, and a disposable toothbrush with integrated toothpaste, while his proudest invention was an early battery-powered car concept that proved too heavy to be practical. In Germany, he wasn't just famous, he was a phenomenon. And when Spencer and Hill's movies were dubbed into German, the voice actors didn't just translate dialogue, they rewrote it and added jokes and wordplay that made the German versions considerably funnier than the Italian originals. The word Bud Spencer entered German slang, meaning to beat up a group of people in a superior and somehow comical way, and when the city of Schwäbisch Gmünd asked citizens to vote on a name for a new tunnel, Bud Spencer Tunnel won the public poll, though the city council compromised by naming their public swimming pool the Bud Spencer Bad in 2011, and Spencer attended the ceremony in person at the very same venue where he had won a swimming competition 60 years earlier. Giuseppe, his son, provided the most intimate portrait in a 2024 interview, describing his father as the least strict person in the world who only ever struck his son once, a single slap on the leg in his entire life, and said his father maintained an almost childlike imagination until death at 87. Spencer was extremely nearsighted and wore thick glasses that he always removed before filming, which means he could barely see during his own legendary fight scenes, yet refused to use a stunt double. His appetite was mythical. If you gave him 2 kilos of pasta, he could eat them all, Giuseppe recalled, and he traveled everywhere with spaghetti, olive oil, and tomatoes. Spencer called Hill by his real name, Mario, and was the only person in the world who still did. But off the set, they were 2 enormous, shy men who barely knew how to socialize with each other, and Giuseppe estimated they went out to dinner together perhaps 3 times in their entire lives. Carlo Pedersoli died in Rome, age 86, and when Terence Hill learned his partner had died, he was standing in Almeria, Spain, the exact location where they had first met 49 years earlier, and at the funeral held in Rome's Church of the Artists, fans spontaneously began singing the theme from Watch Out, We're Mad as the coffin was carried out. The man who always insisted he was only a character and not an actor had made an entire continent sing.